The water bill on my farm had always been predictable. It rose in the summer when the crops needed extra irrigation and dipped in the winter when nature did the work for me. But this month, something was off. The number on my bill wasn't just higher, it was astronomical. My first thought was a leak, but a quick check of the irrigation system showed everything was in perfect condition. Confused, I decided to investigate. The next morning, I spotted something odd near the barn, a small but steady puddle that wasn't supposed to be there. It hadn't rained in weeks, and I certainly wasn't wasting water. That's when I noticed something that made my blood boil, a wet tire track leading toward the road. At first, I thought maybe a delivery truck had run over a water hose or something, but then, later that evening, I heard the unmistakable sound of running water outside. It was coming from the side of my barn. Moving quietly through the shadows, I peeked around the corner, and there she was, my entitled neighbor, Maggie, was in my driveway, using my farm's water supply to give her SUV the most thorough wash I'd ever seen. She had a full setup: buckets, sponges, a pressure nozzle, and even some fancy car wax laid out on my property like it was her personal detailing shop. I stood there for a moment, utterly dumbfounded. She wasn't even trying to be sneaky. She whistled to herself as she scrubbed her car, completely at ease, as if she had every right to be there. The absolute nerve of this woman was beyond comprehension. I stepped forward, clearing my throat loudly. Maggie jumped, dropping her sponge into the dirt. She turned toward me with a sheepish but defiant expression, as if she had been caught doing something as harmless as borrowing a cup of sugar. "Oh, hey there," she chirped, trying to act casual. "I was just, helping clean up the environment, you know? Got to keep the neighborhood looking nice." I folded my arms, not even trying to hide my annoyance. "Maggie, why are you using my water?" She scoffed and waved a dismissive hand at me. "Oh, come on, it's just a little water. You have tons of it, don't you? What's the big deal?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "The big deal is that it's my water. You didn't ask. You just came onto my farm and helped yourself." Maggie huffed dramatically. "Well, I figured it wouldn't be a problem. You're a farmer, after all. You're practically swimming in free water." I stared at her in disbelief. "Maggie, this isn't a public utility. I pay for this water. It's not free." She rolled her eyes. "Okay, fine. If it bothers you so much, I'll pay you back." How much could it possibly be? A couple of dollars. I clenched my jaw, my patience wearing thin. "That's not the point. The point is, you've been doing this for how long?" She hesitated, and that pause told me everything. My eyes narrowed. "This isn't the first time, is it?" Maggie gave an awkward little laugh. "Well, I mean, since you brought it up, yeah, I've been using your water for a while now. But like I said, it's just a little." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Just a little? How many times had she done this? How much water had she stolen from me? And the worst part, she didn't even look the slightest bit guilty. If anything, she looked annoyed that I was making a fuss about it. That's when an idea hit me. If Maggie wanted to act like she was just casually borrowing a little water, maybe it was time to show her the consequences of her actions. I took a slow, measured breath, forcing a calm smile onto my face. "All right, Maggie, no problem. I'll send you a bill for what you've used." Her smug expression faltered slightly. "A bill?" I nodded. "Yeah, you said you'd pay me back, right? I'll calculate how much water you've used and send you the total." Maggie hesitated, then lifted her chin stubbornly. "Fine. Whatever. Send me your little invoice. I'm sure it's barely anything." I smiled wider. "Oh, don't worry, Maggie. I'll make sure it's accurate." With that, I turned on my heel and walked away, my mind already racing with the details of my plan. She wanted to act like she was getting water for free? Let's see how she reacted when she received a very official-looking invoice for thousands of dollars. I wasted no time that night. I enlisted the help of my cousin, Jake, who was a whiz at graphic design. Together, we crafted the most legitimate-looking water bill imaginable. It had everything: a logo that looked official, a detailed breakdown of charges, late fees, and even a stern notice about potential legal action if the amount wasn't paid. And the grand total? $5,000. Now, I knew full well that the actual cost of the water she stole wasn't anywhere near that much, but Maggie didn't need to know that. The point was to make her sweat, to make her feel the weight of what she'd done. I wanted to see how quickly her tune would change when she thought she was on the hook for a massive sum. The next morning, I slid the bill into her mailbox and waited. It didn't take long. Around noon, I heard a blood-curdling screech from down the road. Moments later, Maggie came storming up my driveway, clutching the paper in her shaking hand. Her face was red with fury, and her eyes looked like they were about to pop out of her head. "What the hell is this?" she shrieked, waving the bill in my face. I feigned surprise. "Oh, Maggie, you got my invoice." "Great." I was worried it might have gotten lost in the mail. Her mouth flapped open and closed like a fish gasping for air. $5000. Are you insane? There's no way I used that much water. I shrugged. I just calculated based on your usage. You've been washing your car for weeks, maybe months. That's a lot of water. Her eyes bulged. You can't charge me this. It's robbery. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, so now you care about theft. She let out a strangled noise of frustration. I won't pay it. You can't make me. I sighed, shaking my head. Well, that's up to you. But the bill clearly states that failure to pay could lead to legal consequences. Maggie paled. Legal consequences? I nodded solemnly. Yep. If it's not settled, the matter could be escalated. She sputtered. Escalated to what? I kept my expression serious. Court. Possibly even a lien on your property. Her breath hitched. A lien. I shrugged again. I'm just following protocol. Maggie's face twisted in panic. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She had spent so long thinking she could take whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, without consequences. But now she thought she was in real trouble. And I was just getting started. Maggie's meltdown was everything I had hoped for and more. She stood in my driveway, shaking the fake water bill in her hands like it was a court summons. Her face was a deep shade of red, and her usual smug attitude had been completely wiped away, replaced with full-blown panic. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to compose herself, but her voice still cracked when she spoke. You can't do this. $5,000? That's insane. There's no way I owe that much, she screeched, her eyes darting between me and the paper as if she expected the numbers to change if she looked at it hard enough. I crossed my arms and tilted my head slightly, pretending to be sympathetic. I understand this is a shock, Maggie, but water isn't free. You've been using my supply for weeks, maybe months. These things add up. She let out a hysterical laugh, the kind of laugh people make when they're about to lose their mind. Add up? How much water do you think I used? I was just washing my car. I sighed, shaking my head. Maggie, do you even know how much water a single car wash uses? A commercial car wash uses at least 50 gallons per wash. Now factor in how many times you've done this. Plus you used a high-pressure hose, which wastes even more. Not to mention, you trespassed onto my property to do it. Honestly, $5,000 might be on the low end. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She was completely speechless, which, given her usual ability to argue about anything, was a rare sight. Then, as if a light bulb went off in her head, she snapped her fingers. I'll fight this. You can't just charge me for water like some kind of scam artist, she declared, puffing out her chest. I nodded slowly. That's fine, Maggie. If you want to dispute it, we can go through the proper channels. The bill includes a phone number you can call to contest the charges. Though, just so you know, unpaid bills like this can sometimes get reported to collection agencies. Her eyes widened. Collection agencies? She echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded again. Yep. And from what I understand, unpaid utility bills can affect your credit score. Wouldn't want to mess that up, would you? For the first time, she actually looked worried. Maggie was the type of person who loved to brag about her perfect life. The idea of having financial troubles, especially over something as ridiculous as a water bill, was clearly hitting her where it hurt. But Maggie wasn't one to go down without a fight. She suddenly straightened her back and jutted her chin out, her usual entitled confidence returning. You know what? I have a friend who's a lawyer. I'll ask him about this. You'll see. You can't just make up some fake charge and expect me to pay it. I smiled politely. Sounds like a great idea, Maggie. Let me know what your lawyer friend says. With that, she spun on her heel and stomped back to her house, still clutching the bill like it was a live grenade. I watched her go, amused by how quickly her arrogance had turned into desperation. Less than an hour later, I saw Maggie standing on her front lawn, talking to her so-called lawyer friend. It was none other than Greg, a guy from down the street who worked as a tax accountant. Not exactly the type of legal expert who specialized in trespassing and water theft. But Maggie, being Maggie, seemed convinced that he could somehow get her out of this. From my porch, I could hear snippets of their conversation. Greg was trying to explain to her that, technically, if I wanted to, I could actually sue her for trespassing and theft. He pointed out that I had security footage of her using my water without permission, which would make things even worse for her in court. Maggie wasn't having it. But it's just water, she whined, stomping her foot like a child. He can't own water. Water is free. Greg sighed, rubbing his temples. Maggie, that's not how it works. He pays for that water. It's not like rainwater. If he pays for it, and you use it without permission, that's stealing. I could practically hear Maggie's brain short-circuiting from the sheer effort of trying to process the fact that she might actually be in the wrong. She huffed and puffed, but it was clear that Greg's words were sinking in. Later that day, she showed up at my house again, her posture stiff, her lips pressed into a thin line. I opened the door and leaned against the frame, waiting for whatever excuse she had cooked up this time. I need to talk, she started, then paused, as if the words physically hurt to say. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. We sat down at my kitchen table, where she placed the bill in front of her like it was some kind of explosive device. So, she began, forcing a tight smile, what if we came to some kind of agreement? I raised an eyebrow. What kind of agreement? She waved her hand vaguely. You know, a deal. Maybe I do something for you, and in return, you forget about this bill. I pretended to think it over. Like what? She perked up, clearly relieved that I was at least entertaining the idea. Well, I could bake you something. Or maybe I could help around the farm. I'm really good with, she hesitated, looking around at the tools and equipment in my kitchen, clearly realizing she had no idea how to do actual farm work. Plants. I chuckled. So, let me get this straight. You want to work off a $5,000 debt by baking me cookies. She blinked. I could bake a lot of cookies. I shook my head, trying not to laugh. Nice try, Maggie. But no. The bill stands. She groaned, slumping in her chair. Ugh, you're impossible. This is so unfair. I shrugged. Funny. That's exactly how I felt when I caught you using my water. She glared at me for a moment before crossing her arms and pouting. Fine. I'll figure something out. I smiled. I'm sure you will. With that, she stomped out of my house, muttering under her breath about how ridiculous the whole thing was. As she walked down my driveway, I couldn't help but marvel at how quickly her confidence had crumbled. Little did she know, things were only going to get worse for her. Maggie was quiet for a few days after our last conversation. Too quiet. That was never a good sign. I had expected her to come storming back the next morning, ranting and raving about the unfairness of it all, but she didn't. Instead, she stayed holed up in her house, and I could almost hear the gears in her head turning, trying to come up with a way to weasel out of this situation. Then, just when I thought she might actually give up, I heard from a neighbor that Maggie had been talking to people around town. She wasn't just complaining, she was gathering opinions, trying to find someone who would take her side. She had gone door to door, asking people if they thought it was legal for me to charge her for the water she accidentally used. Most people either laughed in her face or told her she was lucky I hadn't reported her for theft. But a few, mostly her fellow entitled friends, told her she should fight back, that she should stand her ground. And so, naturally, Maggie did what Maggie always did. She made things worse for herself. A week later, I received an official-looking envelope in the mail. At first, I thought maybe she had actually caved and sent me a check, but when I opened it, I burst out laughing. It was a small claims court notice. Maggie had filed a case against me. She was suing me for fraudulent billing and emotional distress. The audacity, the sheer, unbelievable nerve. I had to hand it to her. Most people, when caught red-handed doing something wrong, would apologize or at least try to quietly move on. Not Maggie. No, Maggie doubled down and tried to turn the tables. She had gone from playing the victim to taking legal action, all because she couldn't admit she had been caught. I wasn't worried. If anything, I was looking forward to it. So, I showed up to court with all my evidence in hand. Security footage, water usage records, and even the testimonies of my neighbors who had all seen Maggie using my hose like it was her personal property. Maggie, on the other hand, showed up with nothing but a folder filled with random printouts she had clearly Googled the night before. One of them was a Wikipedia article about water rights. Another was a blurry screenshot of a message board where some random person had written, "You can't charge for natural resources." It was absolute nonsense, and when she confidently handed it to the judge as her evidence, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. The judge skimmed through her so-called evidence, then looked at her over the top of his glasses. "Miss Maggie," he said, his voice dry, "none of this is relevant to the case." Maggie's confident smile wavered. "But water belongs to the earth. It's a human right. He can't just hoard it like a dragon sitting on a pile of gold." The judge sighed. "Miss Maggie, the defendant pays for that water. It is not public property. Your argument does not hold up in this courtroom." Maggie's face turned red. But he made up that bill. It's fake. He tried to scam me." The judge turned to me. "Mr. Walker, do you have proof that Miss Maggie used your water without permission?" I nodded and handed over the USB stick with the footage. The judge plugged it into his computer and watched as Maggie, clear as day, dragged my hose across my property and proceeded to wash her car, humming to herself as if she owned the place. Maggie's mouth dropped open. That's not what it looks like," she stammered. The judge raised an eyebrow. "It looks like you're using his water." Maggie flailed her arms. "Okay, but I didn't know it was his. I thought it was a community water." The judge sighed again, clearly exhausted by her nonsense. "Miss Maggie, your case has no merit. The defendant has not scammed you. In fact, if he wanted to, he could file charges against you for trespassing and theft." Maggie's jaw snapped shut. She finally realized that she was not only losing this case, but that she had put herself in an even worse position. If I had wanted to, I could have made this a lot worse for her. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Walker, do you wish to countersue for damages?" I could see the horror on Maggie's face as she realized she might actually have to pay something after all. She looked at me, her eyes wide, silently begging me not to. And honestly, I considered it. It would have been satisfying to watch her squirm. But at the same time, I had already won. She had embarrassed herself in front of the entire town, and that was worth more than any amount of money. So I shook my head. "No, Your Honor. I think she's learned her lesson." Maggie practically melted with relief, but the damage was already done. The entire courtroom had seen her make a fool of herself. She had wasted everyone's time, and now she had to live with that humiliation. As we left the courthouse, she refused to look at me. Her face was bright red, her fists clenched at her sides. She stormed past me without a word, probably hoping to get away before anyone could remind her of what had just happened. But just as she reached the parking lot, fate decided to deliver one last blow. A city worker, dressed in his uniform, was inspecting the water meters along the street. He glanced up as Maggie passed by, then did a double take. "Hey," he called out. "Aren't you the lady who keeps messing with your water meter?" Maggie froze mid-step. My ears perked up. The worker frowned, flipping through his notes. "Yeah, I thought I recognized you. We've been getting weird readings from your house. Someone's been tampering with the meter to lower their bill." Maggie whirled around, her face a mask of pure panic. I don't know what you're talking about." The worker shrugged. "We've got records, ma'am. And if someone's been messing with their meter, that's a serious fine." Maggie turned to me, her eyes wild. "You did this. This is your fault." I held up my hands, grinning. "Maggie, I had nothing to do with this. Sounds like a separate problem to me." The worker nodded. "Yep, and it's a problem we're going to have to look into. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me." Maggie let out a strangled noise, her head snapping back and forth as if she was trying to find someone, anyone, to save her. But no one did. I watched as she was led away, her once high and mighty attitude completely shattered. It was poetic justice, really. She had gone out of her way to make my life difficult, and in the end, she had only managed to dig her own grave. As I got in my truck and drove back to my farm, I couldn't stop smiling. Sometimes, the universe just had a way of handling things for you. Maggie's reputation in the town was ruined. People whispered about her whenever she passed by, and she became the butt of jokes at local gatherings. She eventually moved away, unable to face the constant reminders of her downfall. As for me, I returned to my farm, content in the knowledge that justice had been served. The water bill returned to its predictable pattern, and life went on as usual. But every now and then, when I saw a puddle near the barn, I couldn't help but smile, remembering the day I taught Maggie a lesson she'd never forget. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.